Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Triglycerides are a type of fat in your blood that you use for energy. But when they're too high, they're extremely dangerous. So testing your blood for triglycerides has turned out to be an important measure of your future heart health and your future heart risk. So triglycerides are a type of fat. We call them lipids because they're not totally fat. There's some protein in there, etc. They could be measured when you have your next checkup, when you have your next physical. It's part of your blood test. Now, doctors more frequently are checking people's triglycerides today, but I still see many times when people have a blood test, triglycerides are not checked. So where do they come from? When you overeat, this is the short version, your body converts any calories you're not using right away for energy into triglycerides. These triglycerides are stored as fat, and in between meals, hormones release the triglycerides so you have a constant source of energy. That's important. So you eat, there's too much sugar in the blood, some of that gets packed away, some of it gets converted to triglycerides. Triglycerides are stored as fat. When you need energy in between meals, triglycerides are a source of energy. I once attended a very interesting lecture by a cardiologist, very funny guy. He said, if you eat like a lumberjack, you better exercise like a lumberjack. Unfortunately, that's not happening. Most of us eat like a lumberjack and then we sit behind our computer and work all day. So if you regularly eat more calories than you need to burn for energy, especially from high carbohydrate, sugary foods, or high fructose corn syrup, that's a bad one, you likely have high triglycerides. It's called hypertriglyceridemia. And this could be destructive to your heart, your brain, your pancreas, your liver. So I'll explain over the course of this episode why elevated triglycerides are dangerous and how to lower them through diet, through exercise, through supplements. I'll mention the drugs too. So hi, my name is Jerry Hickey. I'm a nutritional pharmacist. I'm also the senior scientific officer over here at Invite Health. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Triglycerides, are they as dangerous as cholesterol? You can find all of our Invite Health episodes wherever you listen to podcasts for free, or visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. The information on this episode is linked at the episode description, so I'm going to get going now. So there's really two types of fat that need to get checked on your blood test. Cholesterol types of fats and also triglycerides. And like cholesterol, triglycerides do have their good side. For instance, they're used to transport cholesterol throughout your body. The cholesterol is used for repairing muscle and nerve tissues. Triglycerides are also used for energy and, as mentioned, are used for storing energy for later use in between eating. When elevated triglycerides dramatically increase your risk for developing heart disease, when elevated, triglycerides really do dramatically increase your risk for developing heart disease, and they do a lot of other things too. Now, heart disease is the world's biggest killer. So triglycerides and cholesterol are different types of lipids that circulate in your blood, and they should both be tested for yearly. Triglycerides are stored as unused calories to provide your body with energy, whereas cholesterol is used to build cells and to create certain hormones. So they do have their jobs, but when they're elevated, they're dangerous. So where do triglycerides come from? Most people know that lipids such as LDL cholesterol, it's also called bad cholesterol, and total cholesterol are connected with the fats in your diet. But triglycerides are different. They're strongly related with sugar. In fact, reducing sugar intake is a great way to help lower your triglyceride levels. I'll go into that. So when a simple sugar, such as the sugar in white bread, is consumed, your body quickly converts this into energy. And this leads to an instant jump in your blood sugar level also. So if you're eating more of these type calories than your body needs, the body will store as much of that sugar as it can as glycogen. Glycogen is a stored form of sugar, typically in your liver, and in your muscles. The good part about having a lot of muscle, once it grabs the sugar out of your circulation and stores it as glycogen, it can't get back into the bloodstream. That's why having more muscle and exercising more helps. That's one reason why it helps prevent diabetes and prediabetes. The glycogen in the liver is released in between meals as sugar so that you have a source of energy in between meals. Otherwise, you're going to develop hypoglycemia, and that's no good because you'll really feel poorly. So when you eat excess of these sugary foods, pasta, white bread, potatoes, most desserts, you can only store so much of it as glycogen, and when the storage form is sugar. And when the glycogen storage sites get full, then you start to store you start to convert the excess sugar into triglycerides. And excess triglycerides are stored as fat on the belly. So that's where your belly fat comes from. So this is why triglycerides and sugar are related, and unfortunately, so are triglycerides and diabetes. And unfortunately, triglycerides are a greasy fat. Not all of the triglyceride will be stored as fat. So if the triglyceride level in your blood goes high, it leads to heart disease. And it's strongly connected with cardiovascular events, strokes, and heart attacks. So I'm going to read you some studies on that right now. This is the journal Scientific Reports. It's a number of research institutions, clinics, and hospitals, medical schools throughout Spain, about 20 of them. Almost 3,000 patients enrolled in the study. That was about 53% women. They followed them for many years. And over those years, they recorded 114 heart attacks and 185 strokes. And what they found connected with heart attacks, with a first heart attack, was being 75 years of age or older, elevated blood sugar, low good cholesterol, and elevated diastolic blood pressure. So let me explain what that was. Diastolic blood pressure is the lower figure on your blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is 120/80, the top figure is systole, the bottom figure is diastolic blood pressure. And that's when the heart is refilling with blood. It already pumped, and it's refilling with blood, and it's getting a little rest. So it turns out when the bottom figure in your blood pressure is elevated, that's a risk factor for a heart attack. That's something we've known for years. It's also a risk factor for strokes. But then they looked at what are the risk factors for a first stroke. Once again, it's being 75 years of age or older. Atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is the most common arrhythmia of the heart. An arrhythmia is an improper beating pattern of the heart. And with atrial fibrillation, instead of your heart beating typically like 80 times a minute at rest, it might be beating 300 times a minute. But that beat is all over the place. There's skip beats, there's double beats, there's triple beats, there's all kinds of craziness to it. And what it is, the atrial part of the heart, the atrium, is the top part of the heart. So when oxygen is saturated into blood in the lungs, it goes into the left upper chamber, and that's quivering like jello instead of beating steadily. So it's not pumping all the blood down to the bottom part of the heart. And what happens is remnants of the blood left over that clotting cells can adhere to, and they shoot out and they cause a stroke. So we've known for years that atrial fibrillation is it's the number 2 cause of stroke. The number 1 cause of stroke is high blood pressure. The number 2 is atrial fibrillation. So when they looked at strokes, being 75 years of age or older was a major cause of having a first stroke. Atrial fibrillation was a big cause. A poor glomerular filtration rate. So what's that? That's the ability of your kidneys to function, to get rid of toxins. So when you have decreased kidney function, that's connected with stroke. Elevated bad cholesterol and total cholesterol, but triglycerides. Triglycerides were strongly connected with an increased risk of having your first stroke. But so was albuminuria. That's losing protein in your urine. That means you've lost some kidney function. You're not supposed to lose protein in your urine, so it's getting past the filters. It shows that there's damage to the kidneys. Neuropathy, which is nerve damage, and typically that's associated with diabetes. And retinopathy, which happens with diabetes too, the eye disease. So here we have as a major cause of a first stroke. In Scientific Reports, a couple of weeks ago, by the way, this study just came out, high triglycerides. So here's a second study. It's the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. And it's from the University of Oxford in the UK. Now, Oxford University is always it's always in the top 10 worldwide. Outside the United States, the only two colleges that are typically in the top 10 worldwide are Oxford University and Cambridge. But it's also the Chinese Academy of Medical Sciences in Beijing and a whole bunch of other academic research institutions. So it's a nested case control study. And in the study, 912 people had a heart attack, 1,146 had a stroke, 1,138 had a bleeding stroke, and 1,466 were heart-wise healthy. All the people were between the age of 30 to 79. And here's what they found that were risk factors for stroke and heart attack. Very low density cholesterol, that's called VLDL, intermediately low cholesterol, IDL, and low density cholesterol, that's called LDL. They were all connected with a heart attack or a stroke. HDL, when it was high, prevented a heart attack. Now, what about triglycerides? So we know that certain types of cholesterol, the HDL is the good one, LDL, IDL, and VLDL are bad ones when they're elevated, and they were connected with strokes and heart attacks. But what about triglycerides? Triglycerides were connected with heart attacks and strokes. They were connected with heart attacks and strokes. Neither cholesterol nor triglycerides were connected with bleeding strokes, by the way. But both cholesterol and triglycerides were connected with strokes. So basically, elevated triglycerides are as dangerous for stroke as high cholesterol, and according to a bunch of studies, also as big a risk factor for heart attacks. Now, sugary foods lead to elevated triglycerides if you overdo it and you're not exercising enough. But so does eating the wrong kind of fats, like saturated fats and trans fats. They can also raise your triglyceride levels. So here's why high triglycerides matter. When they're present in excess, triglycerides can be stored as fat, which may lead to obesity and all the health conditions that accompany obesity, like your sugar going up, your blood pressure going up, inflammation increasing in your arteries. Over time, high triglycerides will absolutely contribute to hardening of the arteries, coronary artery disease. That's the biggest killer on the planet. It's thickening of the arterial walls and stiffening of the arterial walls in the heart. So let's explain that. The blood vessels inside the heart are called arteries, but they're much smaller than other arteries. And it's their job to supply oxygen and blood and nutrition to the heart muscle, which is beating over 100,000 times a day. It needs a lot of oxygen. It needs a lot of nutrition. It needs its vitamins, etc. It needs its blood supply. When the blood vessels thicken and stiffen, it's very dangerous. And this can lead to arrhythmias, it can lead to heart attacks, it can lead to strokes. It can lead to sudden cardiac death, it can lead to heart seizures, abdominal aortic aneurysms, atrial fibrillation, and other arrhythmias. It's a very dangerous thing. So when triglycerides are consistently elevated, they absolutely will contribute to heart disease. And heart disease leads to stroke, heart attack, sudden cardiac death. Research shows that high levels of triglycerides in the blood also increase the risk of developing pre-diabetes and diabetes. So if your triglycerides in your blood are elevated, it could be a sign that you have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. It's also a cause of fatty liver disease, and that's an important thing to cover. And I think we're going to end it here. Fatty liver disease is becoming very common in the United States. The triglycerides get stored in the liver when they're elevated, and this is killing healthy liver cells. And you're developing scar tissue, stiffening of the liver. Many people, it will just make them nauseous and fatigued and cause, strange, vague symptoms. But a bunch of people, it causes NASH, hepatitis not related to a virus, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And for some people, it's going to lead to stiffening of the liver and liver failure, cirrhosis, and advanced cirrhosis. And for some people, it'll actually lead to primary liver cancer, which is cancer that originates in the liver. So this is bad. By the way, so far the best thing for fatty liver, besides watching your food and getting exercise, really seems to be a high-quality krill oil that's loaded with phosphatidylcholine. It seems to be very good at getting fat out of the liver. Now, you could have fatty liver and not know about it because your doctor would have to do the correct tests to disclose it. It doesn't really show up on blood tests. Like your liver enzymes could be normal, but on the high end of normal. And you can have fatty liver. Doctors are not looking at it frequently enough because it's becoming very common. So if you have any elevations of the following, you might have fatty liver. Elevated VLDL cholesterol, very low density lipoprotein because that's made out of triglycerides. Elevated intermediate cholesterol, that's called IDL. Elevated LDL cholesterol. Elevated blood sugar, or a big belly. All of those are signs that you might have fatty liver. And like I said, the best antidote for fatty liver really seems to be krill oil. There's no drug available for fatty liver. So I'm going to cut it here because there's an awful lot more to say about triglycerides because they really are dangerous. And in the next part of this episode, I'm going to discuss foods to avoid, and I'm going to discuss the drugs a little bit. But I'm also going to discuss natural remedies, and I'll read some studies on that, on how to lower your triglycerides if they're elevated. So thank you for tuning into the Invite Health Podcast. You could find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or just visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. I hope to see you next time on another episode of the Invite Health Podcast, which will be part 2 of this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. Jerry Hickey signing off.